They sent for me twice before anyone understood there was a problem. The first summons came through the wall of my assigned cell, which was not a cell, the Vane were careful to explain, but a provisional occupancy volume. It was a white box the size of a shipping container, lit from everywhere and nowhere, with a sleeping shelf that adjusted to a body it had clearly never measured before. The voice that came out of the wall was flat and courteous, and asked me to present for classification at the third bell. I did not know what the third bell was. I sat on the shelf and waited until a different voice, less courteous, told me I had missed it. The second summons came with an escort. He was tall the way a crane is tall, all vertical and hinged, with a narrow head that sat too high on a neck that bent in two places. His skin was the gray of wet slate and his eyes were set wide and low, and when he looked at me he did not look at my face. He looked at the air to the left of my shoulder, where I would later learn a Vane expected to find your file hanging like a name tag. There was nothing there. He kept checking, the way a man pats his pockets for keys he knows he left at home. "You will follow," he said. The translator in my collar made his voice sound like a customs official reading from a card. "Senior Registrar Vole will resolve you." I had been on rigs where men said "we'll sort you out," new fish, and meant something kinder than what was about to happen. I followed him anyway. I had nowhere else to be, and the box was making me feel like a sample in a jar. The Having Conservatory was the most beautiful place I have ever wanted to leave. The corridors were wide and curved and floored in something that gave underfoot like packed sand but rang like steel, and the light came up cool, and even out of the walls so that nothing cast a shadow, not even me. We passed Vane going the other way in twos and threes, and every one of them turned that narrow head a fraction to read the air beside me, and every one of them found nothing, and I watched the not finding move through them like a small electric fault. A flinch they could not name. None of them spoke to me. To a Vane I was not a person being rude. I was a sentence with the subject left out. I had been on Earth a month earlier. That is the part nobody at the conservatory could fit into their heads, and I gave up trying to make them. A month earlier I had been 300 meters down in the cold dark off a coast you have never heard of, in a suit that weighed more than I did, welding a crack in a wellhead by feel because the silt was too thick to see my own glove. The transit that took me out, a labor contract, a berth on a bulk hauler, a routing error somewhere past the third jump that I will go to my grave not understanding, had eaten my file along the way, scrambled it. Whatever the hauler's registry handed the conservatory when it dumped me at their dock was a smear. Name maybe, species maybe. The rest was static. To me, that was an inconvenience. To the Vane, it was the end of the world, and I did not understand that yet. Walking behind the crane man with my hands in the pockets of the gray jumpsuit they had issued me because my own clothes had been taken away to be, they said, red. The registrar's chamber was round and deep, a well with a floor at the bottom and tiers of pale benches climbing the walls, and at the center stood a column of slowly turning light. I came to understand later that the column was the file engine, the conservatory's beating heart, the thing that held the registry of every being who had ever passed through, going back longer than my species had been farming. Vole stood beside it the way a priest stands beside an altar he is also slightly afraid of. He was older than the crane man, his slate skin gone the color of ash at the joints, and he wore a long stole of fabric that hung to the floor and was covered, edge to edge, in tiny shifting marks. His file, worn on the body where anyone could read his entire self at a glance. Rank, lineage, every classification he had ever held. To a Vane, Vole was the most legible being in the room. To me he looked like a man wearing his own resume as a cape. "Human," he said. He had practiced the word. It came out with a small click on the front of it. "You will stand on the mark." There was a mark on the floor, a pale ring. I stood on it. The column of light reached out, not unkindly, and ran something cool and tingling across me from feet to scalp twice, 3 times. I had been scanned by harder things on the way into deeper water. I let it work. When it finished, the chamber was very quiet. Again, Vole said, to the engine and not to me. It ran again. The cool tingle, the long pass, the tiers of benches, which I now saw held perhaps 30 Vane watching in silence, leaned in as one body. Again. 3 times more. And then Vole turned his narrow head and looked, for the first time, directly at my face, which I think cost him something, the way it would cost you to look directly at a hole in the floor. "You have no file," he said. "I had one." I kept my voice level. "Years underwater teaches you that panic uses air you cannot spare. It got scrambled in transit. There should be a labor contract on record somewhere. Faro, Dahlia, pressure trades, class 4. If your engine talks to the hauler that dropped me." "You do not understand." He said it without heat, which was worse than heat. "The engine does not file a record of you. The engine files you. Every being that exists in the registry. A being without a registry is not a being whose papers are lost." He paused, and the marks on his stole shivered as if cold. "It is a thing that should not be able to stand on the mark and speak." I have been called a lot of things by a lot of foremen. I had never been called an impossibility before. I will admit it landed somewhere. But I had also learned, 300 meters down, that the worst thing you can do when the situation turns strange is to let it see you change. The seals do not care if you are frightened. The cold does not negotiate. You do the next correct thing with your hands, and you keep your breathing slow, and you do not give the dark a reaction to feed on. So I said, "Then file me." That was the wrong thing to say, and the right thing, and I did not know which for a long time. A sound went through the watching vein. A low harmonic, 30 narrow throats finding the same uneasy note. Vole drew himself up another hand's width, which on a body already that tall was a considerable amount of disapproval. "One does not request a classification," he said. "A classification is revealed, under condition, under load. A being's true file asserts itself when the being is pressed past the comfortable shape it presents to the world. That is the entire doctrine of this conservatory. That is what we do here. We apply load and the registry self emerges. And we record what was always true." The marks on his stole settled. "You will be placed under load with the others. The engine will read what asserts. And then," he said, and I heard something almost like hunger in the flat translated voice, "you will be filed and the order of things will be restored, and I will not have to think about you again." "And if nothing asserts?" I asked. He did not answer. I understand now that he could not. The question did not exist in his language. To a Vane, asking what happens if nothing asserts under load was like asking what happens if you drop a stone and it falls up. It was not a worry. It was a category of nonsense. He should have worried. They put me in adaptive field praxis, which the other trainees called, when no instructor was listening, the cracking room. I learned its real purpose slowly, the way you learn the temper of a new crew. The course took 22 trainees, all of them young Vane near the end of their formation, all of them already filed. They came in with a provisional classification, and the course was meant to confirm it by stress, the way you load test a weld before you trust it with a life. Each trainee had a shape the registry expected them to hold, and the course existed to push them until the shape either held or shattered into its true form. A trainee provisionally filed as a coordinator would be put under chaos until either they coordinated or they broke and revealed they had been something else all along, a follower, a panicker, a leader nobody had seen coming. The breaking was the point. The Vane did not consider it cruelty. They considered it midwifery. The instructor was a Vane called Eshin, younger than Vole, with a quicker bend to the neck and an honest dislike of surprises. On the first day she stood at the front of the lecture theater. Another well smaller, the tiers close enough that I could see the trainees' wide low eyes, and she read the air beside each of us in turn, confirming files, until she reached me and found nothing and stopped. "You are the unfiled," she said, "not a question." "Dahlia," I said, "human. That is not a classification. It's a species and a name. Where I'm from, that's usually enough to get started." A ripple went through the young vein, not laughter. They did not laugh, not the way we do, but something moved across them, a flicker of the air around their heads, and I would come to recognize it as the closest thing they had to it. Eshin did not flicker. She studied me for a long moment with those low eyes. "You will participate," she said at last. "You will be loaded as the others are loaded. You will hold a station and you will be pressed and the engine will watch you. I'm told to treat you exactly as I treat a filed trainee." She paused. "I will be honest with you, human, because I dislike pretending. I do not expect you to survive the course in any meaningful sense. The load is calibrated to the formed mind of a vein at the end of years of preparation. You have had, I am told, a month. You will likely break early and badly. When you do, signal and you will be removed and no shame will attach to it. You are not built for this." I thought about the rigs, about a kid named Petrov who washed out of saturation work in his first month because the dark got into him and would not get out, and how nobody held it against him, and how he went home and did fine. Some people are not built for the deep. There is no shame in it. Eshin was, in her own crane-necked way, being kind. "Understood," I said, and then because I am not a liar either, "but I'll tell you now so you're not surprised later. I've spent 11 years doing work where breaking early gets you killed and 3 other people killed with you. I don't say that to brag. I say it so you know the breaking early thing isn't really on the menu for me anymore. It got trained out. You can load me however you want. I'll hold the station." She did not believe me. There was no reason she should. But she filed the words away. I could see her do it. The small tilt of the head that meant a vein was committing something to memory in the absence of a file to hang it on, and she began the course. The first load was sound. I did not know that at the start. We were each given a station, a curved console that rose to meet the hand, and a task that was deliberately just past doable: route a flow of colored markers through a branching channel faster than the channel narrowed. Simple, tedious. The kind of thing I have done 10,000 times in 100 forms. Keep the flow moving. Do not let the backlog build. Watch 2 things at once and then 3 and then 4. Then the sound started. It came up out of the floor and the walls, not loud at first, a pressure more than a noise, a deep grinding harmonic that I felt in my teeth and the long bones of my arms. It climbed. It found frequencies that made my eyes water and my stomach turn over. Around me the young vein began to struggle, their hands slowing, their narrow heads tucking down, 2 of them within the first minutes hunching over their consoles and going still while the markers backed up and overflowed. The sound was tuned to the vein nervous system, to specific resonances in their hearing, in their balance, in whatever organ they used to feel the registry's presence. It was designed to peel the comfortable shape off a vein mind and see what was underneath. It did very little to me. I want to be honest about why, because the vein never got it and I think it matters. It was not that I am tough. I'm not especially tough. It was that I had spent 11 years inside helmets, inside suits, inside chambers where the machinery that kept me alive made noise constantly. The hiss of gas, the grind of compressors, the long groan of a pressure hull adjusting to depth, the hammer of my own pulse in my ears at 300 meters when the CO2 crept up and the headache started. Sound that hurt was not a novelty to me. It was Tuesday. My body had decided, a decade ago and without consulting me, that an unpleasant noise in an enclosed space was simply the ambient condition of being at work. So when the conservatory sound came up out of the floor to peel me open, it found a person for whom an enclosed space full of punishing noise was the most familiar thing in the universe, the most like home I had felt since I arrived. I kept routing markers. I let the sound become weather. I had done worse work in worse noise for longer with more on the line, and I had a job in front of me, and the job did not care how my teeth felt. When the sound finally cut out, the room was a wreck. 11 of the 22 trainees had broken, gone still, or curled, or signaled for removal, their provisional files cracked open to reveal whatever the engine had read underneath. Eshin moved among them, reading the air, murmuring to the engine. This was the course working. This was the point. My console showed a clean flow, no backlog. The markers had run through clear the whole time. Eshin came and stood at my station and looked at it for a long while. Then she looked at me. I had learned to read a little of her by then, the set of the neck, the angle of the head, and what I read was not satisfaction. It was the first cold edge of a worry she did not have a word for. The load did not assert anything, she said quietly, almost to herself. It should have asserted something. It asserted that I've worked in noisy rooms, I said. Is that not useful? That is not a classification. But she said it slower than before, and she did not move away, and when she finally walked off to tend the broken vein, she looked back at me twice. I did not understand, those first days, how much trouble I was causing simply by being uneventful. To a vein, the course was a sacrament. Load goes in, truth comes out, the being is filed, the order holds. Every trainee who broke and revealed their real shape was a small confirmation that the universe worked the way the vein believed it worked, that under every comfortable surface there was a fixed, findable, fillable self, and that pressure was the key that opened the door to it. The doctrine was not just how they taught. It was how they understood what a person was. A being was its file. The file was its truth, and the truth came out under load. And here was a thing that took load and gave nothing back. I did not break and reveal a hidden coordinator. I did not break and reveal a hidden panicker. I did not reveal anything because there was nothing hidden to reveal, not because I am a saint, but because the version of me that showed up to the console was the version of me that the deep had already pressed flat 11 years ago. There was no comfortable surface for the load to peel. The peeling was done. The job had done it, decades of cold and dark and noise and other people's lives in my hands, and what was left was just a woman who did the next correct thing with her hands and kept her breathing slow. The load arrived looking for a door to a hidden room. I did not have a hidden room. I had a workshop, and I was already in it, and I had left the lights on. The engine could not read what was not there, and to the engine, to Vol, to the whole apparatus of the conservatory, a load that asserted nothing was not a curiosity. It was a crack in the foundation of reality. If pressure could fail to produce a file, then maybe a file was not the bedrock of a self after all. Maybe a being could exist in the load and out the other side as just itself, undecorated, unclassified, and still be a being. That idea, loose in the conservatory, was more dangerous than any weapon I could have carried through their dock. And I was carrying it without trying, the way you carry the cold up from the deep in your bones for hours after you surface. Vol came to watch the second load himself. The second load was disorder. They took the clean branching channel from the first day and they broke it. Halfway through a routing run, the rules changed without warning. A marker that had been safe became fatal. A channel that had been open slammed shut. The colors inverted. The task you had spent 10 minutes learning to do became the task that lost you everything. Then it changed again. And again. The course was no longer testing whether you could do the work. It was testing what you became when the work refused to stay the same, when the ground moved under you faster than you could relearn it, when competence itself was made worthless. This is the load that breaks experienced people, not pain, the loss of footing. Most skilled workers have a deep, quiet faith that if they just do the procedure correctly, the procedure will hold. Disorder attacks that faith. It tells you the procedure is a lie, the ground is not ground, your competence cannot save you. Half the young vein who had survived the sound went down inside the first minute of disorder, and they went down hard, because disorder peels a different and deeper layer. I had a confession to make to myself, watching the rules invert for the third time while a trainee 2 stations down made a sound I had never heard a living thing make. The confession was that I knew this load. I knew it intimately. I had lived inside it for 11 years. There is a thing that happens in the deep, in the cold and the silt, that no surface life prepares you for. The work stops behaving. The crack you came down to weld is not the crack in the brief. The current that was meant to be slack is hauling at you. The visibility that was supposed to be 2 meters is 0, and your dive computer is reading numbers that cannot be right, and your partner's light has gone, and the thing you trained for is not the thing that is happening, and it is happening anyway, 300 meters down with a finite amount of gas and a long cold way to the surface. You do not get to wait for the situation to make sense. The situation is never going to make sense. The deep does not owe you a coherent problem. What you learn, what 11 years grinds into you below the place where words live, is that you do not need the situation to make sense. You need to do the next correct thing with your hands, just the next one, not the plan. The plan is dead, the plan died in the first 30 seconds, mourn it later. The next correct thing. Check your gas. Find your line. Feel for the crack with your glove because your eyes are useless. Breathe slow. The disorder is not an emergency to be solved. The disorder is the medium you work in. You do not fight the water, you work in the water. So when the conservatory's second load came up out of the floor and inverted the rules and made my 10 minutes of competence worthless, it found a person who had stopped expecting the work to make sense roughly a decade before she ever heard the word vain. I let the plan die. I did not mourn it. I stopped trying to route markers by the old rules, and I watched what the channel was actually doing now, this instant, and I did the next correct thing, and then the next, and when that became worthless, I let it go and did the next one after that. I did not need the rules to hold. I had never in my working life had rules that held. My flow was not clean this time. You cannot keep a clean flow through pure disorder. The load is built to make sure of it. But where the vein went still and curled and broke, I just kept moving, losing markers, recovering, losing more, recovering. A working diver in a silt-out feeling along a line in the dark. Calm not because I was brave, but because calm was the only tool that had ever worked, and panic had been trained out of me by people far harder than Vole. When it ended, I had lost more than half my markers. By the course's scoring, I had performed poorly. By the course's purpose, I had committed something close to blasphemy. And I saw it land on Vole from across the theater. He had come to watch me break and reveal my hidden shape. Instead, he had watched a being meet pure disorder, the load that unmakes the formed and confident mind, and respond to it not with revelation but with recognition. As if she had been here before. As if disorder were not the door to her hidden self, but simply the conditions of her trade. He left without speaking. Eshin stayed. She came to my station and looked at the wreckage of my flow, the lost markers, the poor score, and then she looked at me with those wide, low eyes, and she said the thing that I think began the real trouble, the thing that a filed vein was not supposed to be able to think. "You were not afraid," she said. "No. Everyone is afraid in the second load. The second load is fear. That is its entire purpose. The rules die, and the mind that built itself on the rules dies with them, and we read what is left when the dying stops." She tilted her head, that small motion of a being filing something in the absence of anywhere to file it. "You did not have a mind built on the rules. What is your mind built on, human?" I thought about it. I owed her a true answer. She had been honest with me. "The next thing," I said. "Just the next correct thing I can do with my hands. That's all there's ever been down where I worked. You don't get the whole problem. You get the next thing. So that's what I'm made of, I suppose. I'm made of the next thing." Eshin was quiet for a long time. The theater had emptied around us. The broken vein led away to be read and filed. The column of light dimmed to a low turning glow. "That," she said finally, "is not a classification the registry contains." "I keep hearing that." "You do not understand what it means." And for the first time she did not sound like an instructor explaining doctrine to a slow student. She sounded like a person standing at the edge of something deep, feeling the cold come up off it. If a being can be made of the next thing, of a motion, of a verb, of a way of meeting load rather than a fixed shape the load reveals, then the registry does not describe what a being is. It describes only what a being has held still long enough to be caught as. She drew the long fabric of her own small file stole through her fingers, the marks of her own classification, the thing that to her was herself. And if that is true of you, human, then I must ask whether it is also true of me, whether under my file there is not a hidden shape waiting to be revealed, but only a way of meeting the next thing, a motion, a verb. Her hands went still. That is not a question a Vane is permitted to ask. Then don't ask it, I said, gently. I liked her by then. File me as a problem and send me home. I've got a wellhead 300 meters down that's going to need re-welding by spring and a contract that says I'm the one who does it. I didn't come here to break your religion. I came here by accident. Just send me back. I cannot, Eshin said. Vol will not release an unfiled being. To do so would be to admit the registry can fail to file. He would sooner break you correctly than admit you cannot be broken. She looked at me, and there was something in the wide, low eyes that I had not seen in a Vane before, that I am not sure had ever been there to see. And I am beginning to think, Dahlia Farrow, that he cannot break you, which means he will try until one of you is unmade, and I do not think it will be you.